Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun. Today is July 8th, which happens to be my daughter's birthday. Happy birthday, Lee. And I'm here with Sun columnist George Epstein.
How you doing, Mark?
George, how are you?
Good summer, absolutely.
Yeah, we took a little break. George usually on once a month, but we took a little summer sojourn and we're back.
I'm back.
All right, so the last time we were on, you made a couple predictions.
I did.
And how did they turn out?
Right on target. I wouldn't have brought it up to us beforehand if I hadn't been on target. I said a couple of things. One was that the Conway School Board would bow to the will of the people and set the names of the schools back, which they did with enough sort of griping and complaining about it that they probably lost the advantage of the political gain of showing responsiveness to the community, but nevertheless they went ahead and did it. And the other thing I predicted was that the tariff issue, which was at its peak when we last spoke, would sort of peter out or begin to peter out, and that we'd see stability in the stock market and things would simply calm down economically, and that's what's happened. As of today, Trump has just announced another delay in implementing.
So do you think it's a real delay? I mean, do you think it's it's not going to be an issue? The tariffs aren't going to be an issue because he has delayed them and reduced them? Or do you think the other shoe hasn't dropped yet?
I think that he will continue to back off as necessary. Most of this is just noise, and that when push comes to shove and the impact on American consumers is going to become apparent by actually sticking those tariffs in place and keeping them in place, he'll back off, and that's what he's been doing. It's mostly negotiation noise and just annoying to our allies and our trading partners. So it creates conflict, it creates disruption, and there'll be a couple of situations that will be bumpy, but as far as it really turning into a long-term trade war, no one wins with that, and Trump will continue to back off. It's a negotiating ploy.
One thing though, of all the things that he changes politically, you can say he's the art of the deal type of guy and negotiating, but that's the one theme throughout his career actually has been these tariffs. So there's one side that says he ain't gonna give it up.
I think he's a true believer, along with Peter Navarro, that this is something good for America. But it's a reflection of his lack of sense of history. He thinks the 1890s was the place to be, and that's when tariffs were the primary source of revenue for the U.S. government. It was a much bigger and more important deal as far as being a revenue source at that time. Now that's not what it is. What it is and what tariffs are a way to control trade and a way to increase or reduce the amount of buying of foreign goods and trading with foreign countries. And there's no particular gain. And I think he's sufficiently politically astute that he won't be so ideological about it that he'll continue to barrel down this road and make foolish decisions. So he'll back off as needed.
All right, so we're going to get back to the federal government, but since you mentioned the names with the school, do you have an opinion on what we should do with John Fuller? It's John Fuller the school. It's like 14 acres and includes the SAU property, which is the building is gone. That was moved to Main Street, but it's this Route 16 frontage.
The answer is no. I don't have an opinion as to what should be done. I think that in general, buildings that are constructed by town government, school, town, should be retained. They have historical value, and there are always more potential uses that could be done, and rebuilding them or building new buildings is always so much more expensive than refurbishing or maintaining old ones. In the case of John Fuller, right there on 16, right in the commercial heartland of North Conway, it might not make sense to keep that one though, that particular location, that particular piece of land. But the town is so divided about how it might be used. Reading in the Sun about the opinions, it's hard to have, I think, 5 different people quoted in the article, something like that. All 5 had completely different interpretations of what should be done. So there's no consensus, and there's no political win to be had by doing anything in particular. So I don't know what I would do if I were a Conway School.
Well, I'm going to write, because they had a meeting, a John Fuller meeting, and they held it at Loyne Auditorium, expecting it to be overflow, and I think they had 30 people show up, which is kind of interesting itself, but it's summer. And so I'm going to write an editorial, and it's going to be, don't sell it. Don't sell it. And I haven't figured it out, the logic. I mean, I know the logic, but to fill it out. And the idea is that I think that property, and I think the school budget spends too much and blah, blah, blah. And I think they should have closed one of the schools, not that one. But it just seems as though that a piece of municipal property like that, so close to town, that if we ever let that go in 50 years, people are going to say, what? It's like letting Schuyler Park go. And maybe someday it's a welcome center, in 50 years. But I think it's just, and plus it's next to Whitaker Woods, it just seems.
I think, in general, I think that's true. Whether that location is really the right place for municipal activity or not, as you said, for recreational, that may be a good solution.
Yeah. All right, so your column, which will be in the paper on Thursday, is about a really fascinating subject, taxes.
An important one.
It is, but it's so let's make this interesting.
Okay.
Why do you care about taxes?
Well, I care about taxes because of the deficit and debt that the United States has. And I genuinely believe that the biggest threat to America isn't China, it isn't Iran, it isn't North Korea. It is our own debt, and it has the capacity to truly destroy our economy. We're in a situation where 4% of our entire gross domestic product is going to interest payments, and we're in a situation that's uncharted territory. People don't borrow way more than their gross domestic product in terms of total debt, and we never do so. No country in the world survives doing so when they're not at war. So briefly, for periods of time, World War II was an example where the U.S. was very much in debt. Countries go into debt. Big recessions, depressions, you want to stimulate the economy, you do a bunch of borrowing. But in normal times, you don't borrow money. And we're in a situation where we're hitting $1 trillion in interest payments, which serve no purpose. That we're up to $1 trillion out of our $6-point-something trillion federal budget. $1 trillion of it goes to interest payments. It's just as if you piled up that money on the White House lawn and you set it on fire. It doesn't do anything for the American people paying out that interest. It's an incredibly dangerous thing to do because it sucks all this money out of our economy. It weakens our government. It weakens our military and our national defense. It threatens Social Security and Medicare, the things that many Americans have come to count on, as well as all the other social programs, including Medicaid and food stamps, which all took the hit. And the little bit of cuts that were made, and we can talk about those, aren't going to do it.
Before you get to the cuts, I mean, what about the idea that people have been talking about this for really 40 years now? I mean, George W. Bush really was one that accelerated the deficit, and of course the Democrats never.
No, Reagan did.
Okay, so, well, that's true. That's Reagan did.
It was Reagan and Tip O'Neill working together created the problem we have now. And since then, no one's cared. They've just borrowed and borrowed.
Right. Now, I guess I went to George W. because we know that Clinton actually balanced the budget.
No, Clinton didn't balance the budget. George H.W. Bush, remember, read my lips, no new taxes. Right. He looked at the Reagan deficits and he said, this can't go on. And even though he had promised no new taxes, he raised taxes because it needed to be done. And Clinton's budget gained the benefit of that because, of course, Bush was voted out of office. The Cold War ended.
All right, but on Clinton.
And that was, so we actually reduced the defense budget for the first time in forever. And so Clinton was the beneficiary of those cuts that he had nothing to do with.
Yeah, but the only thing I'll say about that is there was this famously Robert Rubin, who's I think is Secretary Treasurer or something, said he was going to, Clinton wanted an $800 billion, which was a lot of money, infrastructure program, and they cut that back. I mean, he politically, I mean, I think it's all true, that he was smart enough. I mean, Clinton was very smart, savvy politically, and he was certainly he benefited from Bush's tax increase, but he also kind of throttled back his own spending.
That was a small portion of it. That was the only argument I make. But you're right. For 2 years, we had a break-even budget over the past 45 years.
Okay.
And that shows the kind of situation.
So why is it? I mean, when is the tipping point? People have been. You've been saying it. I mean, people, not you, but conservatives have been saying that for 20 years now.
No one knows. And the reason no one knows is because the dollar has become so important to the world's economy. And as long as the dollar continues to be the reserve currency that the whole world relies on, I think 90%, 85, 88% of all the world's trade between countries is done denoted in dollars. The whole world relies on the dollar. And so as a result, we're able to borrow money at relatively low interest rates because everybody wants their hand in dollars. They want to have those dollars for the safety. It's the only safe currency in the world. And so that's kept it going. It's enabled us to do all this borrowing at relatively low interest rates, although they're beginning to go up. So I'm not competent, and I don't think anyone is, to describe when the collapse will occur. But we're well on our way, and the pace just speeds up. The more you borrow, the more you pay interest, the more interest you pay, the more you have to borrow, because we're not raising the money to pay for the interest. We're borrowing the money to pay the interest payments. And the column I wrote wasn't about raising taxes for you or Rob or the people who work here at the Sun. I didn't suggest 1 penny in tax rate increases for people who are earning a living. I'm suggesting that there are a whole array of the loopholes and freebies and breaks that are out there that have accumulated over the years that are worth, say, $1 trillion a year, that would cut our deficit in half quickly. And the rest could come from spending cuts, and probably should come from spending cuts. So the details are there, and I probably almost encourage people to read the column, but some of them are just outrageous. The oil depletion allowance.
Right.
It's just a complete freebie to the oil industry. What's called the gross up or the raise in basis when someone dies. So when you get a paycheck from the Sun and you get paid $100, you pay taxes on that $100. When I buy a share of stock and it goes up by $100, I have to pay taxes on that, but I only have to pay half as much as you pay because I'm going to keep it for more than a year, and it'll be a long-term capital gain. And if I'm lucky enough to die, my heirs don't pay anything. The price of the stock gets reset at the value it was at the time I died, and if they sell that share of stock, that $100 gain goes to them with no taxes whatsoever. There are a whole array of these things.
Now, and I guess one of my favorites is that now you can, with the new bill, you can fully depreciate your private jet in 1 year. That's going to encourage you to buy one, I'm sure.
Yeah, no question. So there's an example of something that doesn't bother me. The whole idea of depreciation, I think, is tough on businesses. I think for businesses that are capital intensive, that are trying to grow and need cash in order to do that, and they buy a building, they buy a machine, they buy stuff, they're out that money. If I spend $1 million on a building, I have to write a check for $1 million, and that money is gone. I don't have it anymore. But can I deduct $1 million from my profits that year? No, I can't. I have to spread it over 30 years or whatever the lifetime of that building is. And that stinks. I don't have the cash anymore, and yet I have to pay taxes as if I did have that cash. So there's an example of a deduction that I think is perfectly reasonable. But without any question at all, read the column, but there are certainly $1 trillion worth of taxes that don't cost workers anything and that don't disrupt businesses in any significant way.
And I think one of the things with the big, beautiful bill is what we're talking about, and President Trump signed it on July 4th, is that, one could argue, I would say that if we're going to, everybody should take a little bit of a hit. Maybe the Medicaid program, who knows what kind of fraud is in there, who knows, but I think what rubs people the wrong way is that, geez, if you're going to, fine, the Medicaid people can take a hit, but why did you actually give more tax breaks to the wealthy? with the Trump bill. And I think that's a dig in a hole. We're in a hole, why dig it a little deeper?
So I disagree somewhat. I don't think everyone should contribute a little bit. I think the most outrageous breaks and loopholes are where that should be targeted. And there's plenty of that without hitting middle income workers at all. Not one penny is my suggestion.
Yeah.
And I think the
So you're saying the wealthy should pay more? Or
No.
businesses should pay more?
I think the
Who's
people
left?
who gain the benefit of unreasonably generous loopholes should pay more. And just another point, the IRS estimates that each year $600 billion of taxes goes unpaid because people don't pay their taxes. Other people believe it's closer to $1 trillion that we don't receive. Just on what needs to be purchased, what needs to be collected from the existing tax system. And we refuse to spend a few $1 billion in order to hire the auditors necessary to scare people into behaving. And we're acting more and more like Greece and other countries where it's the standard to not pay taxes. I'm not looking to punish anyone at all. I'm looking for reasonable collections. If you're a car salesman,
right,
and you sell a new car and you get a $500 commission, that's swell. That $500 shows up on your taxes the same as salaries and wages, and you pay your full tax rate on that $500. If I'm a hedge fund manager and you give me $1 million to invest, and I make I can't do the arithmetic in my head, but if you and I make $10,000 on that with that $1 million for you, I typically get to keep 2,000 of it. 20% is what comes to me. It's the commission. It's the same kind of commission that the guy who sells cars make. But for some ungodly reason, I pay half the rate as the person who sold the car because it's treated like a capital gain, as if it was my money at risk. It's your money at risk. I shouldn't get the tax benefit of your money being at risk. I'm talking about outrageous stuff. Read the column, people.
All right, so someone asked me this at a barbecue. You think
It was
Trump,
a cocktail party, really, wasn't it? There was a lot of drinking
It
going on.
was a beer party.
Okay.
All right, so you think Trump is smart?
My mother used to differentiate between my middle brother and me. She'd say, George is smart, but Freddie's cunning. And I always think of that when people ask that question. He's certainly not well read. He's certainly not well educated. Daddy bought him his degrees. But he is a cunning man, and a man who has a great ability to read people and read the public interest and what gets the public excited. He's a cunning man. There's a Harvard professor who years ago became famous for saying, IQ is just one measure of one kind of intelligence.
Seven intelligences.
Really, that's right, 7, 8. Was it 7?
I think it's 7.
7 intelligences. Trump has a couple of those.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, we were talking about that, and I came up with, this is how Trump is a genius. It's easy for the elite on the coast to say, well, he relates to the common person, the regular person, right? But that's a disparage. I think he has an incredible knack to relate to self-interest in a positive way. And that is like, that ridiculous thing about, about how he accepted that $400 million plane, right? So he gets it from, where is it, from Qatar?
Qatar,
Yeah, so the South African president is there in the Oval Office, and he says, kiddingly to President Trump, hey, if I had a plane, I'd give it to you. And Trump says, I would take it, right? So even though it's totally against the Constitution, violates the Emoluments Clause, any person could say, if someone gave me a $400 million plane, I'd take it. You know what I mean? So he taps into that, gets away with it, I think, in that way.
It is a capacity to relate to people because his responses are not what you expect or should expect of a politician, but rather they're what a lot of people would do. Yeah, what they're thinking. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So what do you think about, since we're talking about politics, and we'll move on, is and the other part of this whole thing is that liberalism has been on the march really since FDR, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, except for the far right, we've done civil rights, Social Security, back in FDR's, even gay marriage under the Obama administration. So all these things have marched along, and it seems as though that has run out. I mean, the left basically went too far. I mean, all the stuff about transgender, identity politics, he, him, signing your email. I mean, have all the big issues been settled so the left just went too far? Or is it something else, like, for instance, immigration is obviously a big issue?
So the pendulum does swing back and forth, and it's been a long swing towards liberalism. The Reagan era slowed that down, but not enormously. He and Tip O'Neill agreed to spend piles of money on social programs as well as give tax cuts, which is where those deficits really got rolling. But you're right. It certainly swung far enough to have an awful lot of people just shaking their heads saying, you know, that's too much for me. It's more than I can handle. And clearly it represents a majority of the thinking of the American people in those social aspects. And the transgender sports thing is a perfect example of something that it's hard to find among liberal people that I talk to, anybody who really wants to dig in and defend the fact that a primarily male individual is out there on the field. That's why we have separated girls and boys sports, is because we should have separated girls and boys sports. Their bodies are different safety reasons, competitive reasons. The question is, how quickly has the Trump reversal gone too far in the other direction, or how quickly will it go too far in the other direction? I think an awful lot of people, certainly liberal people, but also conservative people, turn on the news and look at guys with masks on, armed with automatic weapons in public parks, rounding people up because they don't speak English. That's a police state kind of image that I think should freak out the conservative at least as much as the liberal person. Conservatives used to not like to see that kind of exercise of police power, and certainly not on the federal level. So how quickly will the pendulum swing too far in the other direction? And that's where we are. We're in this place of wild swings, and we're all hoping for that magical solution, a leader, ideally a president, who comes in and says, wait a minute, let's just get sane in both directions.
You know, when my liberal friends yak about how bad Trump is, I said, you know, instead of just complaining about him, for good or bad, right or wrong, why don't you look at what the Democrats have done? You know, look at the unforced errors the Democrats did in the last few, with Biden. I mean, he had the forgiveness of student loans. I mean, that just upset people. It just seemed unfair. The whole immigration thing, he open the borders for a couple of years. That people didn't like that. Him saying that he was going to check out after one term and he didn't. People didn't like that. That was an unforced error. Anointing Kamala Harris, that's an unforced error instead of having a primary. You know, so there was a bunch of things that you could look at and say, regular people, including everybody, says that's not right. So when you look at the Trump administration, to me, the unforced errors are so far January 6th, pardoning those 1,000 people who are obviously convicted for breaking into the Capitol, and this tips thing about letting people who make tips not have to pay taxes, because why should they not have to pay taxes when everybody else does? So that gets to your thing about because I think there are images today where in LA, aren't they sweeping like all the military, there's like these sweeping
MacArthur Park is a place I've visited, a very central public place in LA, and it's the guys in the balaclavas, whatever those masks are called, and the automatic weapons and the heavy equipment, the machines, the tank-like machines, the imposition of what appears to be martial law designed to round people up is, I think, just scary. It's not the sort of thing that happens in America and that people have resisted for
Where's
a long
that
time.
tipping point, though? Because that's the other thing is that even though, I think even an illegal immigrant is due process, right? You just can't take somebody and ship them into an El Salvador.
Depends who you are. Apparently, the Trump administration thinks you can.
Okay, so that's the issue, is that most people would say, and I think why, and this I'm asking you, where do you think the tipping point is on that? Maybe it's that scene in L.A. because it looks pretty scary. But most people say, hey, they're illegal immigrants. They shouldn't be here. Out they go.
Is it the deaths that will result from having RFK Jr. as the head of HHS and the discouragement of vaccines, the failure to fund the creation of drugs? Over a 10-year period in the 20-teens, 356 drugs were approved by the FDA. 354 of those were at least, the research was at least partially funded by the federal government. They're yanking all that out of there. I have friends who are alive because of those drugs. People are going to die. The inequities that you see, boy, I think it's awfully easy for people around the country to say, well, I don't know any Spanish-speaking, illegally in the country people, and so the fact that they're rounding them up in Los Angeles, that doesn't bother me so much. I'm not sure that's going to be a tipping point. I think stock market crash, as the national debt grows and as the interest payments grow, is going to be a factor. But I don't think anyone can predict what will be the tipping point. So you have an election in 2026. What's going to be the reaction there? We get to measure the reaction every 2 years, so we're going to find that out. And you made a series of points about the Biden administration. I have more that I've written about in my column and so on. It was terrible. Talk about an incompetent administration. Maybe not evil, like some of the things that Trump does, but clearly incompetent, inability to do the work of the federal government. $5.6 billion for high-speed EV charging stations, right? So that gets voted in. 3 years go by, and of course it's stopped now, but 3 years go by, 56 EV charging stations built with the $5.6 billion that were available there. It was going to be a charging station every 50 years. Now, you might not want charging stations. You might think it was a terrible use of tax money, but they're incompetent. They can't roll things out. They can't get it done. To me, the most embarrassing thing, even worse than the cover-up of his mental facilities, faculties, the most embarrassing thing in the Biden administration was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. He went on television and he said, I can guarantee you it won't look like the withdrawal from Saigon.
Right, with the helicopter on the roof.
The helicopter. Instead, it was a transport plane. And instead of people hanging off the helicopter, they were hanging off the wheels of the right. C-5 transport plane. It was exactly the same as the horrible departure that we made from Saigon. No, the tipping point is particularly tricky because what are you going to tip to? You know, if you said, this Trump stuff is just off the wall, it's crazy, bad stuff's happening. Oh, great. We're going to go with Pete Buttigieg, who left the Newark airport in the shape that it's in and caused the whole thing to shut down. Are you going to go with the incompetence or the bad guys? I think it's very difficult to estimate that.
Yeah, but there's always new political stars that show up. And for presidents, we got a couple more years to go. And events shape that, obviously.
The only hope is an independent.
Well, Elon Musk.
No, he's not an independent. He's Elon Musk.
No, but
he wants to create a political
right.
party, and that's what we don't need is a political party. Why does Trump? Why is he allowed to do the bad things that he does do that everyone agrees? Republicans agree. It's because the Republicans won't stand up to him. Why did Biden stay in office? Why didn't he resign before he got into such bad shape? Yeah. Why didn't he back off of the run for a second term? It was because no Democrat would stand up to him. The political parties require the following of the party line, and as long as we have that situation in place, I don't think there's much hope. I don't see how a Republican or a Democrat walking into the White House today is going to be able to credibly go to the Congress and say, all of you have been incompetent, irresponsible, burying us in all this debt. Every one of you has to change your mindset and your attitude. And they won't. They'll go in and they'll say, gee, it was the other party's fault. It was all the previous administration's fault. And that's what we'll be living with. We need someone to break free of that. And I don't know how that will happen.
I mean, the other thing, I've thought about that too. And I think the gerrymandering has just exacerbated that. I mean, if we didn't have the gerrymandering where we have so many safe districts on Republicans and Democrats, you wouldn't get the extremes. Yep. And if you just got regular, just a more moderate person, it's just a more moderate person, I think would just do our government well instead of what we have now. It basically just on the extremes.
Well, our Supreme Court ruled that gerrymandering for party benefit is legal. Flat out legal. It's absolutely fine to draw the lines, to push all of one party in one place, and to have the other party dominate in 3 other districts. They've said that was legal. The only thing that's illegal is doing so on the basis of race. And so they're splitting that difference, much like our state Supreme Court just recently did when it came to the education funding issue. Again, they just split the difference.
Right.
And cowardice is not a good sign. We used to have principled jurists. We had bad judges, but generally they had principles, and they weren't simply political ideologues following a party line. As long as we have people following a party line, whether in the courts, in the legislative bodies, or in the White House,
In the state,
worry.
just to clarify, if this is right, the state Supreme Court just rendered a decision that said, because the old Claremont decision about how the state doesn't pay enough for public education, and I think the new decision said, yes, that's true, but we're going to leave it up to the legislature to figure it out.
30 years later, after the original one, they said, absolutely, that you summed it up exactly right.
Yeah.
No excuse, it was cowardice. But look at our state budget. Look at the state budget that we just passed. Talk about fairy dust and unicorns. Pass the budget, and it's a balanced budget. The same amount is going to be spent as is going to be collected, except 2 things. They made up the numbers they're going to collect and greatly overestimated the amount of likely tax receipts. There's an enormous dependence on the real estate transfer tax. We have to buy a whole lot of properties over the next 2 years if we're going to balance that budget. For example, that's just one example. And business taxes are not going to be where they are claiming them to be. And of course, they got rid of the interest and dividends tax.
Do you agree with getting rid of the interest and dividends?
No.
Interest and dividends is 5% on interest and dividends, and it's a $2,500, I think,
a minimum. And I think the minimum should be higher than that, right. Substantially higher than that. But if you set the minimum at $25,000, so you could get $25,000 in interest and dividends tax-free, state tax-free, then you'd still collect 90% of the interest and dividends.
Because the weird statistic about that is that there are 750,000 New Hampshire taxpayers. 1,500 of them pay half the interest and dividends.
But exactly.
You just got a few heavy hitters.
So you can set that up and provide a nice free ride for people who are really relying on that interest and dividends to supplement their Social Security, which in itself is on shaky grounds. But so they underestimated the income enormously, but they completely ignored the 2 big financial hits that appear to be coming. One is the court cases are going to pressure the legislature and the Superior Court for education. They absolutely have to come up with something other than the nonsensical $4,000 number that says that's enough for an adequate education in 2026 in New Hampshire. It's a joke. It's laughable, number one. And then number 2, the Sununu Youth Center abuses. I talked to someone who actually read the court filings and some of the court cases. The abuses were horrible. The abuse of those children was monstrous. Sexual abuse, physical, over a long period of time. Under Sununu, under Kelly Ayotte as the Attorney General, and it was just horrible. So they put John Broderick, former Chief Justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court, they put him in charge of the fund to dole out the settlements, to try to work out settlements so they don't all go to court and drag on and cost that much more. And we by the way, had a $300 million judgment by one jury. And that's just one jury, one kid out of thousands, or well over 1,000. They decided Broderick was giving away too much. I mean, he's just trying to negotiate settlements for these horrible abuses. And so they step in and say, first of all, the Attorney General or the governor is going to approve each and every settlement, and we're not going to fund it to actually cover the cost of any of those settlements. So whatever you do, make sure it's out in the future when we're not running for election again, and we're not trying to balance the budget. So you have, no one knows how much, but you have certainly $500 million, but more likely $1.5 to even $3 billion in monies that are going to be necessary to settle those cases. And I don't like government to be sued because it's not fair. Why should I, as a taxpayer, be punished for what these employees did? But you look at the horror of those abuses and the failure of our government, and you say, "Gee, what's right here? What should we be doing?"
It does seem as though there should be, and this is one of those third beer discussions, but shouldn't there be just a normal cap? I mean, a $300 million settlement versus $50 million or $10 million?
And that's what the Attorney General is claiming. He's saying actually that it's a $425,000. It's a little bit complicated, but there is a $300-something thousand cap on judgments against state government and in general in a lot of these kinds of situations. But a jury made up of 12 people in New Hampshire, 12 probably taxpayers, sat there and heard the stories of what was done, and more importantly, what wasn't done. What was known by the leadership in the correction system, in state government, what they knew was going on and had been going on, and their failure to do anything about it, they listened to that and said, this is no good. We have to punish somebody, and we're going to come up with what we think is a fair number. They weren't crazy people. They were a bunch of liberals. They were 12 random jurors from New Hampshire who said, this is horrible, and $300,000 doesn't begin to cut it.
300,000, right.
Or 400, whatever it is.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to say 300 million.
No, and
Right.
300 million, they were sending a message.
Right.
And their goal probably was to scare the hell out of the state and John Broderick and make sure they start settling with these people so that these people who are 20 or 30 or 40 years old don't have to wait till they're 60 or 70 or 80 years old to collect whatever they're going to collect. They want this stuff resolved.
Switching gears a little bit, going back to the Medicaid, and I know I'm asking this because you're on the Memorial Hospital Board at one point, but one is that in the big, beautiful bill is that the Medicaid cuts, what I understand is they're not even going to take effect for a couple of years. So they're going to get past the midterms. But one of the threats outside of people not getting health care is that it's going to affect the local rural hospitals. And I guess Bridgeton is already rumored to be in trouble. I mean, what do you think about that? And how
I think we need a whole show to explain health care reimbursement in America because it's so insane. I don't have a lot of trouble with the cuts to Medicaid that are aimed at hospitals because they're not really aimed at hospitals. It's more complex than that. The state of New Hampshire led America back in the Judd Gregg governorship era in what was called the Metascam monies back then. And the state of New Hampshire, and then all the other states followed, came up with a scam whereby the federal government, which has to match the Medicaid contribution that the states put in, the states came up with a deal where they said, we're going to tax the hospitals, and we're going to tax them a big pile of money, and then we're going to have Medicaid reimburse that, and then we're going to give the portion that we, the state, put in, we're going to give it back to the hospitals, and we're going to keep the difference, the part that was matched by the federal government. It was a wonderful deal where match money brought many tens of millions of dollars a year back then, and now it's $100+ million a year just for New Hampshire. So all the I shouldn't say that. As far as I know, all the states, but at least most of the states, the vast majority of them, run this meta-scam deal where they tax their hospitals, give the money back to the hospitals, and then keep the difference that comes in from the feds. And the states balance their budgets using that money. And basically, they're hitting up on the federal government for a subsidy that was never intended. And the primary change that we're talking about, there's another change that I will talk about in a second. The primary change is to get rid of that or to phase that out. The state governments will take a real hit from that and will wind up paying it in state taxes. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's no savings to America or America's taxpayers as a result of doing this, but it's probably the right thing to do. The federal government shouldn't be getting scammed like this. So that's half of the Medicaid changes. The other half of the Medicaid changes, the work requirements, and every 6 months instead of once a year to get recertified and so on, they're just bureaucratic paperwork burdens to place on people with Medicaid. Sure, there's fraud. You have millions and millions of people. Of course, there's somebody who could work and who doesn't. But the vast majority of people are not capable of working, but they try to make the bureaucratic process so difficult as to force millions of people off of Medicaid. So let's assume they're successful. Great. What's going to happen? Number one, the people who had Medicaid won't be going for wellness checks and other stuff like that. They'll wait till they're really sick, and they'll wait till they have really expensive medical bills, number one. Then they'll go to the hospital, show up in the emergency room. The hospital will have to provide uncompensated care, and then they'll have to raise Medicare rates. They'll have to raise all the insurance rates for employers that they pay and all of us as individuals who pay for our medical insurance. There's no savings by kicking people off of Medicaid. We don't gain anything.
Right, because you can't, the fundamental reason, the foundation of that, hospitals can't refuse care.
That's right.
I mean, so it doesn't matter whether you're insured or not, you're gonna be cared for.
You want to get rid of food stamps? Great. Just pass a law that says McDonald's has to feed people, that they can't refuse people because they don't have any money.
Right.
And you get rid of food stamps. That's great. But we'll pay for it one way or the other.
Right.
You're not accomplishing anything. And our healthcare system is such a mess. The reimbursement system is such a mess. Your article today on the consolidation of hospitals, I don't know if people recognize all the problems that have arisen and will continue to arise as a result of that.
Now, on the Medicaid, former Senator Jeb Bradley, really one of his big legislative victories was to get the Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire. And that still continues. And that added like 60,000 people on getting insured this is 10 years ago now. But there were triggers in that. And when it was originally done, like 90% of the money was going to be reimbursed from the feds. And I don't know what the trigger is now, but the legislature, our state legislature, said if it falls below that, we're out. Do you know that part?
I remember it being in there. As far as I know, there is no such trigger ready to hit. The feds, the Congress, the big beautiful bill, did it the other way by taking it out of the state budget and that match money for the
So on the other thing with the state, and we've gone over these things before, in terms of things that are going to affect people, the vouchers, education, which is unlimited, we've talked about that. I've said it's anti-education. You say no, it's anti-public education. And so I don't agree with this whole voucher system because most of the money are going to people who are already sending their kids to $50,000 schools anyway, and they're wealthy enough to afford it. But it's kind of like my same refrain that I say to people complaining about Trump. I say, why are we in this situation? And part of it is because people are really dissatisfied with public schools. And we've talked about that before, and I'm kind of going into the budget here in Conway, but we just added, we used to have a superintendent, an assistant superintendent, and now we have a superintendent and 2 assistant superintendents. I mean, one's a curriculum, whatever they're called. I mean, what's your sense? I mean, you're a teacher. What's your sense about that? It is a little frustrating for average people who don't follow it, and I follow it, and I still don't get it, why it's so expensive when we have so few kids.
25, 30 years ago, we did have 2 assistant superintendents to the superintendent. And the reason was that we had SAU 13 didn't exist, that SAU 9 covered all the towns, including Madison, Tamworth, and Freedom. And when SAU 13 was created and those towns peeled away, it was less work for the SAU office, and so they got rid of one of the assistant superintendents. I think I agree with you that the curriculum coordinator position, in addition to an assistant superintendent, in addition to a superintendent, seems superfluous. I would love to see teachers with content area knowledge. I talk about department heads and so on in the past. I'd like to see them get a class or two off and some supplemental pay and have them contribute to the establishment and management of the curriculum for content reasons. What should the math curriculum look like? What should the science curriculum look like? So I agree with you. The impact of the charter schools and the private schools and the funding of the private schools and so on is difficult to gauge. What's the impact on special education? I looked at the amount of special education funding in the Madison School District budget that wasn't for kids who were at Madison Elementary School or Madison kids who were at Kennett. They're kids who are in the private schools, kids who are in the charter schools. So you have aides and so on who are paid for in those schools by the Madison taxpayer, and you have an impact from that as well, without getting some of the subsidies that the state should be providing for those students. So if I were running SAU 9, I would be looking at the kind of business office management that they need and the ability to really put together a strong financial team, a strong government compliance team, and one that looks at the most efficient ways to be in compliance with special education, with all the other rules and regulations that are out there, and honestly a group that was more on top of things like the bond issues and the restriction that doesn't allow the sale of John Fuller and at least at this point and stuff like that. And so, what I don't know right now, because I don't follow SAU 9 as closely, is whether they're continuing to pay consultants a big chunk of money, as they were, to come in and do a lot of the financial work and regulatory work for them. Do you know if they're still using that consulting firm down in Meredith or wherever it is?
What do you think about the curriculum? A couple of weeks ago at the school board meeting, they want to tweak the curriculum, and I think partly they may want to reduce a couple of classes and all that. And they were saying, well, we have to judge the interest of students. So I get that. I mean, my response would be, well, you've already seen what they're interested, so we don't have to do more surveys. But the other side is that how much is it that they, we obviously don't want to have a class that no kid goes to, an elective, but it just seems like at some point it's like, this is how we want our school to be run. We want to be really good in math and English and history, the core curriculum. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I think you said the right word. You said they were getting together to look at tweaking the curriculum. That's not what they need. Here you have a full-time curriculum coordinator. You have an expert superintendent on curriculum. I don't know the assistant superintendent, but my guess is you've got great strength there as well. Hard look. I would start probably with a blank piece of paper. I would look at some of the best schools in New Hampshire, best schools in America, but certainly best schools in New Hampshire. Look at what their high school curriculum looks like, where the areas of focus are. It needs to be tweaked to meet the Mount Washington Valley's specific needs. I would engage people from the surrounding towns. If you're going to continue to have us pay for the schools, then we should be contributing to the decision making there. I would take a hard look. I would spend this year looking it over and coming up with potentially a significantly revised curriculum for 2027, and one that was considered cost, as well as student interest, as well as what's most effective in producing improved test scores and so on. I'm looking for somebody to simply acknowledge that they care about academic performance and that the test scores are one reasonable and valuable measure of those. And if so, do something about it, because it's no good. Where it is. So I would take a different kind of look. I think just looking at, making a cutoff and saying, gee, fewer than 8 kids, get rid of that. That's not what I would look for. I've been in schools where kids were taking an advanced calculus class, for example, and there were only 5 kids who signed up for it, and so the teacher used his or her free period in order to tutor those kids, and they used Khan Academy, and they put together a little homeschooling operation within the school, and the kid was taking BC calculus, which is what you do for your advanced placement toughest tests. So there are ways to be creative and find solutions that way, and I don't think necessarily hard and fast rules made by a school board are the way to do it. I think there's a hard look that needs to be done, and I think it probably deserves a very hard look and probably significant change.
All right, so we only have 8 or 9 minutes to go, and it's switching gears to the local economy. So someone who's been around the valley forever, experienced with business, says, well, we have to diversify our economy here, right? And I've heard that for 40 years, and I've said it, in my opinion, for 40 years. We ain't gonna. You're probably the biggest software company that we've had here, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. How many employees did you have?
80.
Yeah. So that's what are the odds?
And they weren't all here.
Okay. So what are the odds of getting someone else? You happen to live here, so that's organically started. But I guess my point is that, I've always said that we should just be we're a tourist economy. Let's be the best tourist economy we can. Now, up in Jackson, with the Black Mountain, like Eric is, he's a big progressive, big idea guy, and he's doing great things with Black, and now they're calling it Jaspin, right? They've kind of coined this thing, and we've got Tim Scott, who's a columnist, contributor, I should say, old school. He says, well, do we really want to be Aspen? Yeah. Like, what do you think about all that?
Well, a couple of things. One is that the technology and high-paying jobs, many of them have changed to being work-at-home opportunities. And so the Mount Washington Valley has, I think, a significant and growing population of people who are making good money sitting at their desk in their house, living here, enjoying living here, walking their dog and snowshoeing at lunchtime and all those sorts of things, and skiing half days when they can sneak it in, and so on. And so you have the freedom to make good money around here without having to go to work at a place here. And I don't think we have the data that we need to find out the degree to which that's taken over the local economy. I mean, I have no idea. I know the Echo staff are largely still employed by the company that purchased Echo, and they're largely living at home. Some of them have moved other places, but they're living throughout the woods here in the Mount Washington Valley, across the border in Maine. And I think we need some data in order to find that out. With regard to tourism, and really cranking up tourism, and I've probably said this before, but when years ago I ran for state senate, and I looked at the difference in tourism in Wolfboro versus Conway, and I looked at how Wolfboro attracts rich people as tourists. They have a lot of money to spend. They're donating a lot of money to Huggins Hospital, which is another place I noticed it, and you had expensive homes on the water and all the rest of it. You had a different kind of tourist. And here you have a tourist who's frequently a day tourist or a very short-term tourist. You have a tourist who is staying in inexpensive lodgings relatively, and now we have lots of competition in the lodging field. They're looking for retail shopping, but they're not looking for Gucci. They're shopping at at outlets, and they're looking to save money, and they love to go to Zeb's and buy candy. And we have designed a tourism economy that attracts lower income, middle income, and lower income people who are looking for a vacation. And Wolfboro has an economy that attracts tourists that have a lot of money. Berlin has tourists who drive machines and zip around. And so some thinking about that wouldn't be a bad idea, but
well, there's so many double-edged swords to that, because one is that the chamber 20 years ago targeted us as being a family resort. So if you're a family resort, young families don't have as much money, for one thing. Two is that places like Wolfboro, I mean, they're naturally more wealthy. Winnipesaukee just attracts a wealthier crowd. I was in Boothbay Harbor Sunday, actually, for Peter Edwards' service. Not a lot of cheap hotels around Boothbay Harbor, right? I mean, it ain't going to happen. And the other thing is that if you attract more higher-end people, you end up like Jackson Hole, where their population actually went down because they have so many wealthy people. Yeah. It just exacerbated the housing situation.
Yeah. No, I'm suggesting that you have to make a decision and then say, this is what I'm aiming for. I don't know. And maybe it's already been made, and I think that might be part of your point as well. I mean, you have so many existing interests, the retailers and the hospitality folks in hotels, motels, restaurants, bars, and so on. You have so many people that is their job, that's their business, that's their role in the economy, and how in the world would you ever change that? So if we've made that decision, and if that's a done deal, then you're right. Then you begin thinking, well, how do you leverage that? How do you make that more successful? And what do we want to be different? Do we want more people here? I drove up here from Madison today, and
traffic?
Yeah, I don't want to do that with more people. I loved having the Volvo tennis tournament. We're both tennis players, big fans. It was great seeing it, but I didn't want to drive around town during the Volvo tennis tournament. So how do we? What is it we want? What would improve things beyond what we have now? Settlers Green is certainly a high quality outlet operation, and they want to provide additional amenities and so on for people. Are people having fun here? But the volume of drugs, the degree of alcohol use, the STR problems that arise, that's what we've brought ourselves into. If I thought there was something we should be trying to change, I wouldn't keep it a secret. I'd let you know. Certainly getting rid of STRs, I've already commented on. But I don't have a magic bullet that says, gee, this will just make it better. And is it so terrible? I don't know. It's not what Bill Marvel grew up with. It's not what I grew up with 50 plus years ago.
I always think of the guy who complained about one of the development, all the hotels. Is I moved here in 2009 and it's changed. And I said, wait a minute, but you're okay with Lowe's and Home Depot and all that stuff that came in 2005.
Yeah. You know, Ames and Kmart, they were not great successes from my perspective.
No.
So an interesting time to be up here. I think it's looking at tourists as I drove up, walking on the sides of the roads. Their shopping bags were full, and people seemed happy. The folks, the traffic moved. It wasn't as bad as during the Volvo tournament. The north-south road, I got part of that, and that is a big win for the area. So, is it a disaster? No. But what could be better?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that give us another 30 years, we'll be twice as big by hook or by crook. But I do think we're going to have a challenge with the roads. And I was always an anti-bypass person, for people who remember that. But man, the north-south road and the widening really helped things for the last 25 years. But we're going to get close to gridlock again, and maybe that's like every tourist town. But
I was always pro bypass. I thought it was absolutely. It was
man,
always
that was
the right
worst
thing to
possible thing. That'll be another discussion for another day.
Well, it certainly would have an economic impact. Would have been great for Echo. You don't have to have Motorcycle Week people all outside your window revving their motors at the stoplight in Conway. So yeah, I was a fan of.
Except that 80% of even at its best, the bypass was only going to take 20% of the traffic. I mean, that was lobbied by.
As a Berlin guy, didn't Berlin deserve to have a bypass?
No, it's easier to go up 93 and over there for trucks. I mean, that was such a straw man argument, and Anyway, George, we're done.
Good.
Okay, thanmes a lot. We'll see you again.
Thank you. I'll be here.
Okay, take care.
Have a great summer.
Okay.